Every fighter scheduled for the historic White House card has refused to step into the octagon unless Dana White increases their pay. The shocking mutiny has thrown the South Lawn event into chaos, with top stars uniting in a rare standoff that has the entire promotion scrambling. Let's get into the details. UFC Freedom 250, also known as the UFC White House event, is scheduled to take place on June 14, 2026 on the South Lawn of the White House in Washington, D.C. On paper, it is supposed to be the most historic fight event ever staged in the United States. In reality, it became the flashpoint for every unresolved tension in the sport: money, power, and who actually gets respected inside the UFC. The event was first announced by President Donald Trump on July 3, 2025, during a rally at the Iowa State Fairgrounds, where he said, "Does anybody watch UFC? The great Dana White? We're going to have a UFC fight on the grounds of the White House." The crowd went wild. Dana White, Trump's longtime friend and the CEO of the UFC, confirmed shortly after that the plans were locked in. The event's name is a reference to the 250th anniversary of the United States Declaration of Independence. Before the card was even announced, the complaints started coming. Jon Jones, the fighter most people would call the greatest of all time, went public with a bombshell. Over several months, Jones had expressed great interest in appearing on the UFC's White House card. But when the promotion announced the lineup, Jones was an obvious exclusion, and White said Jones was never strongly considered for the event and was retired. Jones was not having it. He fired back publicly, writing, "Hey everyone, I wanted to address Dana White's comments from this past weekend because the truth matters to me and the fans. Dana, you were heated about why I'm not on the White House card, but let's clear something up. My team and I were actually negotiating with the UFC for that fight. Real negotiations. I even came down from my original number. And what was I offered in return? I was lowballed." That was not a quiet grumble from a retired legend. That was a declaration of war, and it was only the beginning. Jones, who had retired as heavyweight champion in 2025, addressed Dana White's claims about his hip issues directly, saying, "Yes, I have arthritis in my hip, and it's painful, but that doesn't mean I can't fight. So, let me get this straight. If I had accepted the lowball offer, suddenly my hip would be fine and I'd be on the White House card? That doesn't make sense. I even received stem cell treatment last week to get ready for the White House card. And training camp was scheduled to start today. I was preparing to be ready." Then came Ronda Rousey, the former champion who helped build the UFC into what it is today, who did not mince words. "Dana knows the White House card sucks," Rousey said. "They pushed it for a year, and it fell extremely short. UFC is not the place to go to make money. Champions like Valentina are selling their T-shirts on OnlyFans." And then Conor McGregor. Before the card was even fully assembled, McGregor had already fired his shot. From across the Atlantic, McGregor took to social media with a list of demands: $100 million to fight at the White House, along with 100 U.S. golden visas for myself and family and friends. "I look very forward to entertaining the fighting world once again." Three of the biggest names in the history of the sport, all of them outside the White House card, all of them pointing fingers at the same thing: money. The UFC's White House event, officially titled Freedom 250, moved forward without Jones. Instead, the promotion booked Alec Pereira against Cyril Gane for the interim heavyweight title, while undisputed champion Tom Aspinall continues recovering from serious eye injury. The event was proceeding, but the noise around it was getting louder with every passing week. To understand why money became the centerpiece of every conversation around UFC Freedom 250, you have to understand the scale of what Dana White and TKO Group Holdings were attempting to pull off. This was not a fight card. This was a production unlike anything ever attempted on American soil. TKO Group Holdings President and Chief Operating Officer Mark Shapiro spoke about the White House event on a quarterly financial call, during which he said the promotion is expecting a price tag upwards of $60 million. Let that number sit for a moment. $60 million. The promotion is expected to cover the full cost of the event, including roughly $700,000 to restore the South Lawn after use, and no public tickets are being made available. In January 2026, It was reported that no taxpayer funding is being sought and the overall expense is projected to exceed the $21 million budget required to stage UFC 306's Sphere show in September 2024. The UFC was spending more on this single event than it had spent on almost any show in its history. TKO president and COO Mark Shapiro was blunt about the financial outcome, telling Wall Street analysts, "I want to be clear about something. We will not profit from the White House event independently. We will not be making money on America's 250th anniversary." He said the company is engaging corporate partners and others, who he believes can offset about half the cost of the event, meaning the company is planning for $30 million in losses or more if costs continue to rise. Now, here's where the story gets sharp. The UFC is planning to lose $30 million on a single event. They are funding $700,000 just to replant the White House lawn. They are building a custom arena from scratch on federal property. But when Jon Jones, the man with the most title defenses in UFC light heavyweight history, a two-division champion, a fighter who re-enrolled in stem cell treatment to be ready, asked for more than $15 million to fight at this historic showcase, the answer was no. Jon Jones revealed that the UFC offered him $15 million to fight Alex Pereira, a figure that looks substantial on its surface. However, the deal ultimately fizzled out because Jones expected a higher payday than what the promotion put on the table. Jones posted on X, "I was ready, willing, and physically able to step in. I was willing to take substantially less than Aspinall asked, but they wouldn't budge $1 over $15 million. Joe Rogan entered the conversation and sided firmly with Jones. It was a money thing. Jon was saying they wouldn't budge over $15 million, said Rogan on JRE Fight Companion. This is for an interim title. If he was going to get $30 million to fight Aspinall, half of that is kind of crazy. Rogan added, "He's the greatest of all time, and he's going to make the White House card. If he makes the White House card, you're like, oh, Jones is back. The whole card completely changes." And what made this argument even more loaded was the person who came to Jones' defense next, Tom Aspinall. The undisputed UFC heavyweight champion and the very man Jones had feuded with for years over a potential fight stepped forward and defended his longtime rival. This is going to probably be crazy to a lot of people listening, but why is the UFC not giving Jon the respect he deserves financially? That's crazy to me. Aspinall told Ariel Helwani, "If anyone should be getting paid a lot in this sport, it should be Jon Jones for the stuff that he's done." That's me saying that after the history that I've had with Jon Jones. If anybody should be getting money in this sport, it's Jon Jones. According to reports discussed during the interview, the UFC had previously offered Jones around $30 million for a fight with Aspinall. And Aspinall argued that figures showed the promotion knew Jones' value and questioned why they couldn't do the same this time around. So the UFC was willing to plan a $60 million event, absorb a $30 million loss, and spend hundreds of thousands restoring a lawn, but could not find room to pay its most famous active fighter what he considered fair value. That contradiction became the engine driving every pay complaint that followed. The UFC had just announced a 7-year media rights agreement with Paramount Skydance Corporation worth $7 billion, with Paramount exclusively streaming all events for 7 years, starting in 2026, and events would move away from pay-per-view at no additional cost. The promotion had never been richer, and that made the pay arguments impossible to dismiss. The Jones situation was the loudest explosion, but it was not the only one. Across the weeks between the White House card announcement and Fight Week, a cascade of names, some current, some former, some Hall of Famers, lined up to voice their frustration with the way the UFC was handling fighter compensation around this event. And the language they used was not diplomatic. Ronda Rousey went further than almost anyone. On the Jim Rome show, when asked why her MMA comeback in 2026 was not taking place in the UFC, Rousey said, "They didn't want to set a precedent of giving me the guaranteed money that I deserve because once I raise that tide, it lifts all the boats. They just made a $7 billion deal with Paramount. So it's in their best interest actually not to put on the best fights possible, but to spend as little money as possible so they can keep it." They care about putting on the most cost-effective fights. Those words hit like a hammer, not because they were surprising, but because they were specific. Rousey was not speaking in general terms about fighter pay. She was describing the structural logic behind how the UFC builds its cards, not around the best fights, but around the cheapest fights that still sell. The former champion revealed earlier that she initially approached the UFC about staging her comeback there, but discussions stalled once financial terms changed following the promotion's long-term broadcast agreement with Paramount. According to Rousey, the shift away from the pay-per-view model meant the UFC could not match the financial guarantees that had been previously discussed. That breakdown led to her partnership with Most Valuable Promotions, the company led by Jake Paul and Nakisa Bidarian. Then there was the corporate dimension Rousey added that few were willing to say publicly. She said, Dana's now legally obligated to maximize shareholder revenue. It's not just about proving the concept of fighting and putting on the best fights possible and proving that this is a sport to be taken seriously. I think now that they've sold the company, it's kind of out of Dana's hands. In other words, her argument was not even that Dana White was the villain. Her argument was that the new corporate structure had turned him into an employee, and employees follow orders from shareholders. Rousey was even more direct at the press conference for her Netflix fight. It used to be that UFC is the best place that you can come in combat sports to make a living and be paid fairly. Now, it is one of the worst places to go, and so many of their top athletes are leaving to go and find pay elsewhere. It's why champions like Valentina are selling their content on subscription platforms. These people at the ground level, a lot of them are living at poverty levels, fighting full-time. This company just got $7 billion. There's no reason they can't afford to pay their athletes at least a living wage. Brandon Royval, a UFC flyweight, rejected the White House event long before Jones did, and his reasoning was not about money at all. Royval said he had no interest in fighting at the event. I don't care to fight in front of a bunch of billionaires and rich people who couldn't care less about me. He wanted to compete in front of true MMA fans who could relate to him. That one line, fighting for billionaires, became a rallying point. It captured something that the money arguments alone could not: the cultural distance between the people being asked to take punches and the people buying $1. 5 million ticket packages to watch them do it. When Royval dismissed the White House event, Sean Strickland supported the flyweight's perspective. Strickland said, I do like whatever Brandon Royval said. He said that he doesn't really want to fight in front of billionaires, and I do understand that. That makes sense, bro. Strickland went further, adding, just to go hang out with the Epstein list? I'm good, dog. I'm good, dude. Then there was Colby Covington, one of the most vocal Trump supporters in MMA, a fighter who had visited the White House before and the kind of name that was widely expected to be enthusiastically on board. When reports circulated about fighter pay being squeezed by the cost of the event itself, Covington's frustration became a talking point of its own, with his comments about feeling financially sidelined adding fuel to the narrative that even the UFC's own political allies were not happy with the numbers on the table. UFC Hall of Famer Tito Ortiz was reportedly offered only a $1.5 million ticket package to attend as a paying customer, not a fighter. Ortiz publicly complained after being told to pay for his own place at the UFC White House event on June 14th. He said, after the 16 years I gave to them from the very beginning when they first bought the company to almost the end when they sold the company, I don't get tickets. I got to pay for my own tickets when I do want to go. The last time they had a Miami event, I had to pay $1,000 for a ticket. What all these individual grievances point toward is not one bad contract negotiation or one difficult card build. They point toward a systemic problem inside the UFC that has been simmering for years, and that the White House event with its $60 million price tag and its roster of missing stars finally forced in a full public view. Based on court filings from late July 2025, the Johnson versus Zuffa antitrust lawsuit, originally filed in 2021, is proceeding. In May 2025, 2 antitrust lawsuits were filed against the UFC. One, led by former fighter Miesha Tate, specifically challenges the enforceability of arbitration clauses and class action waivers in UFC contracts. The other, filed by former fighter Phil Davis, alleges that the UFC's anti-competitive practices also negatively impacted the ability of non-UFC fighters to secure fair wages. These are not internet arguments. These are federal court cases. The core allegation running through all of them is the same one Rousey was making from her press conference stage, that the UFC uses its dominant market position to keep fighter pay suppressed, and that the contractual tools it uses, arbitration clauses, exclusivity periods, champions clauses, make it structurally difficult for fighters to push back. The UFC counters this with a number it likes to repeat. Dana White promised after the $7 billion Paramount deal was signed that fighter pay would change. It will affect fighter pay big time, White said. From deal to deal, fighter pay has grown too. Every time we win, everybody wins. Jake Paul, who has become one of the most vocal external critics of UFC fighter pay, seized on that comment immediately. Every fighter in the UFC now has a clear picture of what the revenue is. No more PPV excuses, Paul wrote. Get your worth, boys and girls. The tension is that every time we win, everybody wins is a slogan, and fighters were arriving at the White House car negotiating table looking for actual numbers. Beginning in January 2026, starting with UFC 324, the UFC increased its post-fight bonus structure, raising Performance of the Night and Fight of the Night awards from $50,000 to $100,000 and introducing additional $25,000 bonuses for any knockout or submission not selected among the standard 4 post-fight awards. Those are real increases, but for a card projected to cost $60 million, and for stars who measured their market value in the tens of millions of dollars, an extra $50,000 in bonus money was not the conversation they were trying to have. The White House event also threw into sharp relief how the